They sat across the white linen table, expecting me to sign away half my life to fund their betrayal. My husband and my sister thought this dinner was their victory lap, the final coronation of a long, deceitful game they believed they had played to absolute perfection. The atmosphere inside the Copper Finch was thick with the rich scent of seared ribeye, aged oak, and expensive Napa Valley wine. But to me, it smelled like an execution chamber where the trapdoor was about to be dropped. When I slammed the thick, double-clasped manila envelope down on the polished table, the soft clink of fine silver and crystal vanished instantly. Their smug, rehearsed smiles did not just fade, they dissolved into complete ash. Inside that envelope was not a settlement check for hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was a signed confession they did not even realize they had made, wrapped inside a bulletproof legal trap I had spent 3 excruciating weeks quietly building for them. My name is Eva Thomas. I am 32 years old, and I serve as the Vice President of Operations at Atlas Bridge Logistics in downtown Chicago. Tonight, tucked into a plush leather booth in one of the city's most exclusive steakhouses, I felt less like a high-powered corporate executive and more like a prisoner watching the drop floor of the scaffold being tested beneath her feet. Across from me sat the 2 architects of my destruction. Blake, my husband of 5 years, leaned forward in his charcoal suit, his arms resting on the table with the practiced, rehearsed sincerity of a second-rate car salesman trying to push a vehicle with a blown transmission. Beside him, my younger sister Lily glowed. It was not the soft, radiant glow of genuine joy, but the radioactive, triumphant certainty of someone who believed she had just pulled off the heist of the century. Her hand remained plastered over the gentle curve of her stomach, smoothing down the fabric of her cream sweater, as if she were holding onto a winning lottery ticket she had managed to steal right out of my purse. They thought this was going to be a civilized negotiation between reasonable adults. They thought they had backed me into a corner where pride, corporate decorum, and family loyalty would force me to surrender quietly. What they failed to understand was that I was not looking across the table at my husband or my little sister anymore. I was looking at 2 ruthless co-defendants in a criminal conspiracy to ruin me. Blake cleared his throat, adjusting his watch, an expensive anniversary gift I had purchased for him 2 years ago, and began his smooth, practiced pitch. He suggested we sell the River North apartment, split the equity straight down the middle, 50-50, and add a modest monthly spousal support payment since Lily could not possibly work with a baby on the way. Just 2 or 3 years, Eva, he said, keeping his voice soft, almost paternal as if he were trying to calm an unstable child. It is my child, Eva. I have a moral responsibility to make sure this baby has a proper start in life. He spoke as though his affair were a noble burden he was courageously agreeing to carry. Rather than a rusted knife, he had jammed directly between my shoulder blades. Then Lily stepped in, her wide, blue eyes shimmering with a perfectly timed, practiced vulnerability that she had been perfecting since we were children. "Love just happens, Eva," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly for dramatic effect. "We did not mean for it to happen, but it did. You have always been the strong one. You have always built your own way. You do not need the money or the security the way Blake and I do right now. Be the bigger person," her eyes begged me. "Save the family. Pay the bill." I sat in absolute silence, watching Blake's thumb subtly brush against Lily's wrist under the edge of the table, a private, intimate gesture that used to belong entirely to me. They were so utterly sure of who I was. They were certain that Eva, the reliable older sister, the corporate problem solver, would do what she had always done: fix the disaster, write the check, take the blow, and suffer in dignified silence. They were right about one thing: I was going to pay a very high price tonight, but it was not going to be for their silence, and it certainly was not going to be for their future. I reached down into my leather tote bag, pulled out a heavy manila envelope, and dropped it onto the center of the table. The sharp thud echoed off the mahogany paneling like a judge's gavel striking a block. Blake flinched, his smooth posture momentarily buckling. Lily's hand froze dead over her belly, her calculated expression wavering for a fraction of a second. Before we discuss splitting a single dollar of my assets, I said, my voice dropping into the cold, clinical register I used when liquidating underperforming supply routes. There are a few foundational facts you have both completely forgotten. And those facts are going to decide how this night ends, not for my life, but for yours. To understand how we ended up in that booth at the Copper Finch, you have to rewind 3 weeks. 3 weeks ago, my entire world was glowing golden. After 6 years of 80-hour work weeks, of managing global supply chains through massive international crunches, of missing sleep and burning through every ounce of my physical energy, the board at Atlas Bridge Logistics officially named me Vice President of Operations. It came with a massive compensation package, a sign-on bonus, and performance-based stock options that, if managed properly, would guarantee my financial independence and retirement before I turned 40. I remember standing in my corner office, looking out over the Chicago skyline, feeling an overwhelming surge of pride. I called Blake first, then I called Lily. I told them we were going to celebrate. Meet me at the Copper Finch at 7, I said. Tonight, everything is on me. Tonight, we have finally made it. I arrived 30 minutes early. I wore an emerald green silk dress I had bought months prior, saving it specifically for an evening that felt grand enough to deserve it. I sat at a corner table, sipping champagne, imagining the look of pride on my husband's face, imagining my sister giving me a tight hug and telling me I deserved every bit of it. Then they walked in. They did not arrive separately, as I had expected. They walked through the front doors together, Lily's arm looped tight around Blake's. Her body leaned into his with a familiarity that sent a sudden, primitive chill down my spine. Blake would not look at me directly. He kept his eyes fixed on the hardwood floor, his jaw clenched tight. I felt a sharp, warning prickle at the back of my neck, that deep, instinctual alarm system every woman possesses, but I shoved it down. I was too high on my own victory, too blinded by the euphoria of my career milestone to listen to the instinct screaming in my ear. Instead of toasts, warm congratulations, or laughter, what followed was a bizarre, clinical interrogation. The moment Blake sat down, he did not ask how the board presentation went. He asked if the salary increase was effective immediately. He asked whether the newly awarded stock options were considered marital assets under Illinois law. Lily leaned across the table, asking if the tax implications of my new tier would affect our joint mortgage or the valuation of the River North apartment. I laughed it off at first, assuming it was just Blake's usual anxiety about money, trying to reassure them that we were safe, that everyone was taken care of. But the cold, heavy silence that followed my laughter was thick enough to crush bone. Then Lily reached out, took Blake's hand directly on top of the table right in front of my face, looked me straight in the eyes and said, "We have news too, Eva. I am pregnant." My breath hitched. "What?" I managed to ask, looking between the two of them, expecting some kind of absurd, twisted joke. Blake did not look up from his napkin. "It is mine, Eva," he whispered. "It is mine." The entire restaurant seemed to instantly evaporate around me. The sound of clanking wine glasses, the muffled jazz music, the low murmur of wealthy diners, all of it faded into a deafening, roaring rush of blood behind my ears. Before I could even process the words, before my brain could register the incomprehensible scale of the treason, the pitch began. They had clearly spent days rehearsing it. They explained that the only noble, mature thing to do was to arrange a swift, quiet divorce. They said that given Lily's sudden condition, it was only fair that I sign over the deed to the River North apartment so the baby would have a stable, comfortable home in the city. They suggested I act as a generous, supportive aunt, gracefully stepping aside to protect everyone from public embarrassment. You would not want a messy scandal breaking out at Atlas Bridge just as you take the VP seat, would you? Lily added, her voice dripping with pseudo-concern. Your reputation is everything, Eva. You would not want people thinking your personal life is out of control. I did not scream. I did not throw my champagne in Blake's face. I did not slap my sister. Decades of corporate discipline locked my emotions behind a steel vault. I quietly motioned for the waiter, handed him my corporate card, and paid the $300 dinner bill. Neither Blake nor Lily made even the slightest motion to reach for a wallet. I stood up, adjusted my coat, and walked out to the valet. I drove Blake 5 blocks in total silence. He sat in the passenger seat, clearing his throat repeatedly, trying to start a speech about how these things happen and how nobody planned for this. At a red light on Michigan Avenue, I quietly reached over, unlocked his door, looked at him, and said 2 words, "Get out." He tried to argue, but the expression on my face stopped him cold. He stepped out onto the rainy sidewalk, and as the light turned green, I drove away. I watched him in my rearview mirror, standing on the curb in the downpour, shrinking smaller and smaller until he was nothing more than a dark speck in the red glare of my taillights. When I got to the empty apartment, my phone rang. It was my mother. She was not calling to ask if I was okay. She was calling in hysterics, crying weeping tears, not for her eldest daughter whose life had just been shattered, but for Lily. "She is so fragile, Eva," my mother sobbed into the receiver. "She is young, she made a mistake, but she is carrying a life now. You are the strong one, Eva. You have always been able to handle pain. You have a huge salary now. You can survive this. Lily cannot." My own mother actually went on to ask if I would be willing to gift them a portion of my bonus for a down payment, so the new family would not be stressed during the pregnancy. I did not argue. I did not cry into the phone. I simply ended the call, turned off my cell phone, and sat down on the cold marble floor of my kitchen. I stayed there until the morning sun began to bleed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. In those quiet, agonizing hours of darkness, the illusions of my entire life burned away, leaving behind a stark, undeniable truth. I had never truly been a wife to Blake, nor a sister to Lily, nor a daughter to my mother. To all of them, I was nothing more than a financial safety net with a pulse. I was a human bank account designed to fund their comfort and absorb their failures. And right then, sitting on that cold floor, I made a solemn promise to myself. That bank account was officially closed forever. To understand how 2 people could carry out such a callous, systematic betrayal, you have to understand where I came from. I grew up in a cramped, drafty house in a rusted Ohio steel town where love was treated like a scarce commodity, strictly rationed like food during a drought. Early on, my mother decided that Lily was delicate, artistic, and sensitive, meaning she required every ounce of warmth, patience, and financial resource the family possessed. I, on the other hand, was deemed sturdy. I was the child who did not cry when she fell, the child who did not need praise, the child expected to figure things out on her own. By 16, I was working 30 hours a week at a local diner after school, handing half my paycheck directly to my mother to put into a ceramic jar on the kitchen counter for family expenses. Meanwhile, Lily was given money for private art classes, brand-name clothes, and trips to the mall with her friends. She was allowed to have a youth. I was assigned the role of an unpaid assistant parent. The defining moment of my youth happened on the day of my interview for a prestigious full-ride university scholarship, my one and only ticket out of that dying town. An hour before I was scheduled to leave, Lily threw a violent temper tantrum because I would not let her borrow my only formal outfit. In a fit of rage, she grabbed the back of my dress and yanked it so hard, she ripped the zipper completely out of the fabric. When I ran to my mother in tears, showing her the ruined dress, my mother did not scold Lily. She did not even tell her to apologize. She looked at me with cold exhaustion and said, "Stop upsetting your sister, Eva. She is sensitive, you know how she gets. Just fix it with a safety pin and go." I went to that scholarship interview with 3 silver safety pins holding the back of my dress together, biting the inside of my cheek to keep from crying in front of the dean. I won the scholarship anyway, and when I packed my bags for college, I carried one of those rusty safety pins in my wallet as a permanent reminder of a hard lesson. No one was ever coming to save me. I had to build my own armor. That lesson was reinforced again during my senior year of college. I fell in love with a charming, easygoing senior named Derek. I thought he was my haven from the chaos of my family. Instead, while I was working double shifts to cover my tuition, Derek secretly used my social security number and personal information to open 3 high-interest credit cards in my name. By the time I discovered what he had done, he had run up over $7,000 in debt buying electronics and taking his friends out to bars, before vanishing out of state. It took me 2 excruciating years of working 80-hour weeks, surviving on diner shift leftovers and instant ramen to clear my credit score from Derek's theft. That experience altered my DNA. I vowed then and there that never again, for as long as I drew breath, would I allow any partner, relative, or friend to touch my financial foundation. When I met Blake 4 years later in Chicago, he seemed completely different. He was a sales representative for a commercial auto group, a man with a crooked, boyish grin and a relaxed charm that seemed to balance my intense, perfectionist drive. On our third date, over cheap takeout pizza, he openly confessed that he had managed to accumulate $40,000 in personal loan and credit card debt due to poor investments and bad life choices. At the time, I foolishly mistook his confession for profound honesty and moral integrity. I thought, here is a man who takes responsibility for his mistakes. Because I loved him, and because I wanted to start our life together without a dark cloud hanging over us, I agreed to pay off his $40,000 debt in full. But I did not do it as a starry-eyed fool. The scars from Derek and my mother were too deep. I called my trusted friend Nora, a brilliant, relentless contract attorney I had met in business school, and had her draft a formal, legally binding personal loan agreement. The contract explicitly stated that the $40,000 was a structured personal loan with an accrued annual interest rate, callable in full upon demand, or in the event of a marital dissolution. When I handed the document to Blake, he barely skimmed the text. He laughed, called me a cautious little executive, signed his name on the dotted line without reading a single clause, and took the check. A year later, when I decided to purchase our home, a high-end, 2-bedroom apartment in River North, Nora stepped in again. "You're putting up 100% of the down payment from your premarital savings. Eva," Nora had warned me over coffee, "do not put his name on the deed. Put the property into a single-member limited liability company." I listened to her. I formed Thomas Harbor LLC, funded it entirely with my personal funds, and had the LLC purchase the River North property outright. Blake grumbled briefly when he realized his name would not appear on the title documents, but he never pressed the issue. He was content living like a permanent guest in a luxury hotel where he never had to pay the bill or worry about the maintenance. Then came Lily's arrival in Chicago. 2 years ago, she dropped out of her 3rd community college attempt in Ohio and announced she was moving to the city to find herself and explore her artistic identity. Naturally, she asked to stay on our couch for a week or 2 until she found an apartment and a job. 2 weeks turned into 6 months. My home became an obstacle course of her wet towels dropped on the hardwood floors, empty wine bottles left on the counters, and expensive groceries devoured while I worked 14-hour days at the office. But worse than her laziness was the uncomfortable, boundary-crossing closeness that began to develop between her and Blake. They would sit on the couch together watching movies late into the night while I was upstairs finishing quarterly reports. They had private jokes I was not privy to. They shared whispered conversations that instantly stopped the moment I walked into the room. One evening, while Blake was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the kitchen island. A notification flashed across the screen from Lily. "Don't tell her about last night. She would not understand." My blood had run cold that night. I confronted Blake immediately. He did not even blink. He gave me a smooth, perfectly constructed explanation about how Lily was feeling overwhelmed about her finances, how she had broken down crying the night before, and how she begged him not to tell me because she was embarrassed about her lack of success compared to mine. He played the protective, noble brother-in-law so convincingly that I chose to accept the comfortable lie rather than confront the terrifying, jagged reality beneath it. Nora, however, did not accept the lie. During one of our monthly lunch catch-ups, I casually mentioned the growing friction at home and Blake's erratic behavior. Nora put her fork down, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Eva, stop being blind. You are a genius when it comes to corporate logistics, but when it comes to your family, you have a massive blind spot. You need to protect yourself further. You need a post-nuptial agreement." I had laughed it off initially, calling her paranoid, but Nora was persistent. She drafted an ironclad post-nuptial agreement anyway, citing routine wealth protection and asset structuring for high-earning executives. A few months later, an opportunity to use it presented itself. Blake had gone out drinking with his former college buddies, gotten egregiously intoxicated, and managed to crash his sports coupe into a concrete highway barrier. He was arrested for driving under the influence and faced severe legal charges and massive property damage bills. Terrified of losing his job and going to jail, he came to me sobbing, begging for help. I paid off the property damages out of my pocket, hired a top-tier defense attorney to handle the DUI charges, and kept the entire nightmare quiet. But before I handed over the money, I brought out Nora's post-nuptial agreement. I framed it casually as standard financial insurance and asset protection required by my financial advisors after a major liability event. Blake, desperate, hungover, and panicked, scrawled his signature across the final page without reading a single line of text, then went right back to practicing his golf putts down the hallway. I locked the post-nup away in my heavy home safe, right beside the LLC documentation and the loan agreement, and forgot about it. I had no idea that on that quiet, desperate evening, I had unknowingly loaded the very weapon I would use 3 years later to destroy them both. The morning after that horrific first dinner at the Copper Finch, I did not go to work. I sat in Nora's downtown legal office, nursing a cup of black coffee that had long since gone cold. I recounted every detail of the dinner, the demands for the apartment, the 50-50 equity split, the monthly spousal support, and Lily's pregnancy announcement. Nora listened silently, her pen tapping a rhythmic, cold cadence against her legal pad. When I finished, she did not gasp. She did not offer a dramatic expression of sympathy. She simply stood up, walked over to her window, turned back to me and said, "Go to your safe, Eva. Bring me every single document you have on Blake, the apartment, and your sister. Now." An hour later, I was back in her office, laying out the accordion folder I had retrieved from my safe. There was the Thomas Harbor LLC formation paper, proving absolute single-member ownership of the apartment. There was the signed $40,000 personal loan agreement with accrued interest. There was the executed post-nuptial agreement. And then, tucked under an old velvet box containing my grandmother's ring, I found an envelope I had completely forgotten existed. It was an official medical correspondence from the Fertility Institute of Chicago, dated precisely 14 months prior. A year ago, before Blake's mother suffered a severe stroke that consumed our lives for months, Blake and I had briefly discussed trying to conceive. We had both gone in for routine reproductive health evaluations. When the results arrived in the mail, his mother's emergency occurred on the exact same day, and the unopened envelope was tossed into the safe and buried under a mountain of urgent paperwork. I tore the envelope open right there in front of Nora. I read the clinical lines, my eyes scanning the technical terminology. Sperm concentration, 0 mmol azoospermia. Motility, 0%. Diagnosis, permanent, irreversible azoospermia secondary to severe adolescent mumps complication. Natural conception, statistically impossible. I stared at the paper in absolute, stunned silence. Blake was completely, non-negotiably sterile. He had been sterile his entire adult life. And yet, for the past 3 weeks, he had been walking around Chicago with his chest puffed out, proudly boasting to my family and my face that he had gotten my younger sister pregnant. Nora leaned over my desk, read the report, and a slow, predatory smile spread across her face. "This changes everything, Eva," she said softly. "It means one of two possible realities. Either your sister slept with another man, got pregnant, and is pinning the child on Blake to exploit your income, or she is not pregnant at all. Either way, it is a coordinated campaign of extortion and fraud. What do we do?" I asked, feeling a cold, razor-sharp focus replace the hollow grief that had been occupying my chest. "We stop playing defense," Nora said, leaning in. "You have spent your entire life absorbing their damage. Now we build a trap. We let them stew in their own greed. We let them think they are winning. And then, when they think they are coming to collect their prize, we obliterate them." The strategy began with absolute financial strangulation. Over the next 2 weeks, I moved with quiet, surgical precision. I removed Blake's name from my joint credit card accounts. I canceled his access to my secondary accounts, cut off his luxury gym memberships, canceled his streaming subscriptions, and redirected my corporate paycheck to a brand new private bank account at a completely different institution that he had no knowledge of. By the second afternoon, the panicky text messages began rolling in. Blake texted me repeatedly, complaining that his card had been inexplicably declined at a high-end gas station, that his credit card was rejected at a lunch meeting, and asking why the utility accounts were suddenly requesting payment updates. I did not reply to a single text. I let him sit in his own panic, feeling the sharp, cold edge of financial reality slowly closing in around his neck. Lily tried a different, more emotional angle. She sent me lengthy, guilt-inducing text messages describing fake morning sickness, claims of severe dizzy spells, missed rent notices, and warning me that the stress I was causing her was dangerous for the baby. I replied to her with calculated brevity, feeding her just enough subtle hope to keep her greedy. "We will address everything and arrange the financial transfer when we meet to finalize the paperwork." I wanted her hungry. I wanted her desperate for the big payday she believed was coming. Then came a rainy Thursday afternoon, 6 days before our scheduled final dinner. I was working from home in the River North apartment when the building's front desk called up, announcing that my sister was in the lobby refusing to leave. I told the doorman to send her up. When I opened the front door, Lily stood in the hallway looking like a tragic actress auditioning for a Victorian drama. She was wearing an oversized gray hoodie 3 sizes too large, clutching her stomach with both hands, tears streaming down her face. She burst into the foyer, sobbing loudly about how she was experiencing spotting and severe cramping, and begging me to give her $500 in cash immediately so she could go to an elite private women's clinic across town. "I cannot go to a normal emergency room, Eva," she cried, wringing her hands dramatically. "The stress of what you are doing to Blake and me is hurting the baby. Please just give me the cash." I stood there, looking down at her, feeling a strange, detached sensation. I stepped forward and pulled her into a firm embrace, patting her back while making soothing noises. But as my arm wrapped around her waist under that oversized hoodie, my fingers pressed firmly against her side. My heart stopped for a second. Underneath the thick cotton of the hoodie, I did not feel the soft, natural give of human skin, fat, or a growing uterus. I felt a distinct, smooth, unnaturally firm edge. It felt synthetic. It had a rubbery, seamed texture that compressed slightly under pressure before popping right back into shape. I pulled back, keeping my expression entirely neutral, mask-like. "Lily, you look pale," I said smoothly. "Go into the master bathroom, wash your face, and calm down. I will go get my purse from the bedroom and give you the cash." She sniffled, nodded pathetically, and hurried into the master bathroom, closing the door behind her. The moment the bathroom door clicked shut, I did not go to my purse. I walked straight to the entrance hallway, where Lily had dropped her massive leather shoulder bag on a chair. I unzipped it, and began quietly sorting through the contents. At the very bottom of her bag, crumpled beneath makeup bottles, half-empty water flasks, and receipts, I found a folded piece of paper. I smoothed it out. It was an official order confirmation, and invoice receipt from a commercial theatrical website named PropBumpsCom. The line item read, Product, Stage-grade silicone maternity prosthetic, second trimester illusion, 3-4 months. Color tone, fair light. Features, adjustable shoulder straps, breathable silicone body seal. Total paid, $149.99. I felt an incredible, icy clarity wash over me. I stood up, walked silently down the hallway, and stood beside the master bathroom door, which was cracked open by a fraction of an inch. Looking through the tiny gap, I watched my sister stand in front of the vanity mirror. She had pulled up her oversized hoodie. She was not crying anymore. She had a cold, arrogant smirk on her face as she reached down, adjusted the beige silicone straps running across her shoulders, and turned sideways to admire her artificial profile in the glass. She patted the synthetic rubber belly, chuckled softly to herself, and straightened her hair. I stepped back silently into the living room, smoothed my face into an expression of warm concern, and waited for her to step out. When she emerged, wiping a fake tear from her cheek, I handed her $200 in cash. I told her we would settle the entire property transfer, the spousal support agreement, and the future of her child at our dinner the following week at the Copper Finch. She took the cash, hugged me, and left, completely cured of her fake medical emergency by the absolute promise of an imminent 6-figure payout. That night, I sat with Nora in her office until past midnight building the second envelope. We inserted the Prop Bumps invoice, high-resolution photographs of the receipt, the original certified fertility report proving Blake's total sterility, the Thomas Harbor LLC title deeds, the signed $40,000 debt agreement with updated interest calculations totaling over $84,000, and the fully executed postnuptial agreement containing Clause 12. And finally, Nora added a printout of a screenshot from Lily's own cloud backup, a text exchange between Lily and her best friend from Ohio that Nora's tech investigator had legally pulled from shared metadata. Sent while Lily was sitting on my couch 3 days prior. As soon as Eva signs the apartment over and transfers the cash, I am going to fake a miscarriage. I will say the stress caused it. Then Blake and I sell the place, split the cash, and I am taking my half straight to Cabo. Eva will never know. I slept for 8 straight hours that night, the deepest, most peaceful sleep I had experienced in over 10 years. Now, sitting in the dimly lit booth at the Copper Finch 3 weeks later, the final scene of the trap was playing out exactly as designed. Blake and Lily had arrived 30 minutes early, acting like jackpot winners waiting to collect their check. Blake was wearing a tailored suit blazer I had purchased for him in Italy 2 years ago, pulling out Lily's chair with a grand, theatrical tenderness that was entirely for my benefit. The moment I sat down, Blake slid a typed paper across the table. It was a formal proposal outlining their demands. Sell the River North apartment immediately, split the net proceeds 50-50. Assign 40% of my corporate stock options to him as marital property, and establish a mandatory $5,000 monthly spousal support payment to Lily for 36 months. Lily leaned forward, working the emotional guilt angle with practiced ease. Think about Mom, Eva, she pleaded softly, her eyes wide. Mom's heart is so weak. If you make this a dirty court fight, it will destroy her. And besides, I am entering my 2nd trimester now. I can feel the baby kicking. I need peace, Eva. I need security for your niece or nephew. I sat perfectly still, holding my wine glass midway to my lips. 2nd trimester? I asked, keeping my voice soft, curious. Yes, Lily said quickly, nodding her head with absolute conviction. I felt the baby kick for the first time yesterday morning. It was magical. It changed everything for Blake and me. A cold, razor-thin smile touched the corners of my mouth. Lily, I said quietly, setting my glass down on the white tablecloth with a precise, metallic tap. 3 weeks ago, when you first broke this news to me, you claimed your affair with Blake had just happened a few weeks prior. If that timeline were true, you would be roughly 6 weeks pregnant right now. At 6 weeks, a fetus is the size of a blueberry. It does not have limbs. It certainly does not kick. You just proved, in your desperation to play the tragic mother, that you are lying about the timeline, or lying about everything else. Lily's face flushed a deep, ugly red. She opened her mouth to speak, but I did not give her the chance. I reached into my tote bag, pulled out the thick, heavy manila envelope, and dropped it onto the center of the table. Before we discuss splitting my life's work, I said, let us open this. Let us talk about what is actually inside this envelope, and what is actually under your sweater, Lily. I reached into the folder, pulled out the postnuptial agreement, and slid it directly across the white linen to Blake. He stared down at the document, his brow furrowing in confusion. What is this? He muttered. Turn to page 14, Blake, I instructed cold. Look at the signature page. He flipped the page over. His eyes widened as he recognized his own distinct, scrawled signature, dated the very night I had paid off his wrecked car and saved him from a public DUI arrest. You told me that was insurance paperwork for the insurance company. Blake stammered, his voice suddenly rising in pitch. You did not read it, I said flatly. If you had, you would have seen Clause 12. It states clearly that any voluntary act of marital infidelity, proven by documentation or third-party admission, entirely invalidates any claim to marital property, alimony, spousal support, or equity in assets owned prior to or during the marriage. I filed for divorce this morning on the grounds of uncontested adultery. I have your text messages. I have your verbal confession. You get nothing, not a single cent. Blake sat frozen, the color draining completely from his face until he looked like a corpse sitting in an Italian suit. Before he could process the blow, I pulled out the second document, the original loan agreement from 5 years ago. And then there is this, I continued, pointing to the figures. $40,000 for your original debts, $25,000 for the wrecked Lexus, plus 5 years of accrued interest at 6%. The total debt sits at $84,200. It is fully callable upon the filing of a divorce petition. I am demanding full repayment within 14 business days. Lily stared at Blake, her eyes wide with sudden horror. What is she talking about? She whispered, grabbing his arm hard. Blake, what is she talking about? You said she owned the apartment. You said we were getting $500,000. You are broke, Lily spat out, looking at Blake not with love or affection, but with the utter revulsion of a con artist who realized she had backed the wrong mark. You do not have anything. I leaned forward, looking at Blake with cold mercy. I am a reasonable businesswoman, Blake, I said. Here is your choice. You sign the uncontested divorce papers sitting in that envelope right now. You renounce every claim to my assets, my home, and my income. You walk away quietly with the clothes on your back. If you do that, I will tear up this $84,000 loan agreement and forget you ever existed. If you refuse, I will file a civil fraud lawsuit against you by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, freeze your bank accounts, and garnish your wages for the next 15 years. Blake did not hesitate. He did not even look at Lily. He snatched the pen from my purse, so fast his fingers trembled, flipped to the final page of the divorce petition, and signed his name with such desperate force that the black ink smeared across the page. What are you doing? Lily shrieked, slamming her hand down on the table, completely abandoning her sweet, vulnerable persona. You coward! You promised me we were going to take care of each other. You promised me we were taking the apartment. Blake turned on her, his face contorted in rage. She owns everything, you idiot. He yelled back, uncaring that nearby diners were turning to stare. If I do not sign this, she sues me for 80 grand. I will be bankrupt. I will go to prison. You lied to me. Lily screamed, her voice cracking with fury. You told me she was soft. You said she would give us whatever we wanted just to avoid a family scandal. And you told me she would pay us to disappear. Blake snapped back, his hands shaking violently. It was a pathetic, hideous sight. Two parasitic conspirators who had spent months plotting to bleed me dry, turning on each other like starved animals in the middle of a five-star steakhouse. It was loud, it was ugly, and it was the most profoundly satisfying thing I had ever witnessed in my entire life. I cleared my throat, a dry, sharp sound that sliced through their screaming match. Instantly, both of them snapped their heads toward me, remembering who was holding the leash. "We have not discussed the baby yet," I said softly. I pulled out the second stack of papers from the envelope and laid them face up on the table. I slid the Fertility Institute medical report directly under Blake's nose. "Read the diagnosis, Blake." Blake leaned down, his eyes scanning the medical terms. "Permanent, irreversible azoospermia secondary to adolescent mumps. Sperm count, 0. Blake's brow furrowed. He looked up at me, completely bewildered. "What does this mean?" "It means you are sterile, Blake," I said, ensuring my voice carried across the table with terrifying clarity. "You have been completely, biologically sterile since you were 14 years old. You cannot have biological children. It is a physical impossibility." Blake's head snapped toward Lily as if he had been struck with a baseball bat. The air left his lungs in a heavy, wheezing gasp. "What?" he whispered. "What?" Lily's face went instantly pale, a chalky, ghostly white. "No," she stammered, backing away into the leather cushions of the booth. "No, that test is wrong. That is a fake medical report." "Blake, do not listen to her. The baby is yours. He has your eyes, Blake." An impressive physical achievement, I interrupted smoothly, considering that a 6-week-old fetus does not have eyes yet. "But let us clarify things even further, shall we?" I laid down the final 3 items. The order confirmation from PropBumpsCom, the high-resolution photos of the $149.99 invoice for the silicone belly, and finally, the printed screenshot of her text message to her friend in Ohio, detailing her plan to fake a miscarriage and flee to Cabo with the stolen money. Blake stood up so fast, his heavy oak chair crashed backward onto the floor with a thunderous bang. The entire dining room went dead silent. The restaurant manager began making his way briskly toward our table, but Blake did not care. He reached across the table, grabbed the front of Lily's cream sweater with both hands, and squeezed hard. Instead of yielding to the soft flesh of a pregnant abdomen, his hands sank into the firm, synthetic rubber of the silicone prosthetic underneath. The distinct, hollow thump of compressed rubber echoed clearly in the silence of the room. Blake stared down at his own hands, then looked at Lily with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. "You are not pregnant," he choked out, his voice cracking. "You lied to me. You made me betray my entire life for a piece of rubber. I did it for us." Lily screamed, dropping her delicate victim act entirely, her voice shrill and vicious. "You were broke, Blake. You were a pathetic, failing salesman with no money and no future. I had to come up with something to get her money, because you were too utterly stupid to think of a plan yourself." They tore into each other right there, shouting, cursing, blaming each other for the collapse of their fraudulent scheme, while I sat back in my green silk dress, taking a slow, calm sip of my red wine, watching the destruction play out exactly as I had scripted it. When the restaurant manager finally reached the table, looking panicked, I raised a single hand to calm him. "It is handled," I said quietly. I stood up, collected my legal original documents, and placed them neatly back into my leather tote bag. I looked down at the 2 shattered figures standing across from me. "Here is how tonight ends," I said, my voice dropping into a cold, absolute command that left no room for debate. "I have enough evidence on this table to send both of you to state prison for felony, grand larceny, conspiracy, and criminal extortion. I could hand this portfolio to your regional manager at work tomorrow morning, Blake, and you will never work in commercial sales again. I could send these photos and invoices to Mom and Dad tonight, Lily, and let them see who their golden child really is." Lily fell back onto the booth, sobbing actual, bitter tears, not the rehearsed tears of a victim, but the terrified, desperate tears of a con artist who had finally run out of moves. I will not do any of that, I continued, on 3 conditions. First, Blake, your signed divorce papers stay with me. You pack your personal clothes from my apartment by midnight tonight, leave your keys on the counter, and never contact me again. Second, Lily, you are leaving Chicago tonight. You will pack your bags, get on a bus back to Ohio, and tell Mom and Dad that you realized the city was not for you. In 3 weeks, you will tell them you had a silent, early natural miscarriage. No drama, no accusations, and no mention of my name. If I ever hear your voice again, if you ever ask me for another dollar, or if you ever spin one more sob story to our family, every picture, invoice, and text message in this envelope goes directly to Mom, Dad, every relative in Ohio, and every contact in your phone book. Lily nodded frantically, her body shaking as she clutched her fake silicone belly, muttering, "Okay. Okay, I promise. I am sorry, Eva. Please." I looked down at her one last time, my eyes cold and devoid of any remaining warmth or familial obligation. "If you ever do manage to have a real child one day, Lily," I said softly, "learn how to be a mother. A real mother protects her child. She does not invent one as a prop to rob her sister." I turned to Blake, who was standing motionless, staring at the floor in utter humiliation. "The dinner bill is your problem tonight, Blake. Consider it my final gift to you." I turned on my heel and walked out of the Copper Finch. Behind me, I could hear Blake desperately calling my name, asking how he was supposed to pay the bill or get home without his credit cards or his car, but I did not slow down. I did not turn around. Outside, the Chicago night was crisp, cold, and clean, smelling faintly of autumn rain and fresh lake air. I handed my ticket to the valet, stepped into my car, and tossed the manila envelope onto the passenger seat. It was just paper now, harmless, powerless paper. For 3 long weeks, I had carried the suffocating, crushing weight of 2 malicious people who saw me as nothing more than a resource to be harvested. Tonight, sitting behind the wheel of my car, looking out at the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement, that heavy weight vanished completely. I was alone. I had no husband, no sister, and no family left to rely on. But as I shifted into drive and pulled smoothly into the Chicago traffic, a deep, profound sense of peace washed over me. I did not need them. I had built my own foundation, laid my own traps, and won my own freedom. I was finally completely free. If you enjoyed listening to this powerful story of betrayal, smart revenge, and standing up for yourself, please show your support by liking this video, sharing it with your friends, and subscribing to the channel for more incredible narrated stories. Do not forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story release. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done if you were in Eva's place? Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next dramatic story.